If you've played a good chunk of the Zelda games, you've probably noticed that a lot of stuff gets reused in the series. Recycled puzzles from previous games, mechanics introduced in previous entries that stood the test of time, or just a tradition being kept alive. Past locations appearing again is also a classic in the series, even if it's just a reference for a nostalgic effect, like the Ranch Ruins from Breath of the Wild clearly being the remnants of Lon Lon Ranch from Ocarina of Time. Breath of the Wild is full of these references on its map. Even the earlier games had these references, like how the names of the sages in Ocarina of Time are the names of the towns in Zelda 2. Even if you didn't notice all of them, one you probably did notice is that a lot of characters show up again and again throughout the series. I don't know if they have their own curse from an ancient demon or something, but man do some of these guys show up often. But have you ever asked yourself, how many times have these characters appeared, and who are the most recurring characters in the series? That's what we'll be looking at in this video, the characters that show up the most in these games. Before we begin, let's establish some rules. I won't be mentioning Link, Zelda, and Ganon, as we all know they appear over and over again and is therefore pointless to talk about them. Of course, I won't be counting remakes as a different game than the original. Ocarina of Time 3D is the same game as the original Ocarina of Time, for example, and will only count as one game. I know it seems obvious, but better be safe and clarify it from the start. As per tradition on this channel, I'll be only covering the mainline games in this video, so no spin-offs. I think it's better that way since the question of who shows up the most would be really easy to answer, so let's keep this video a little interesting. Also, to keep things interesting, and not to make this video a week long, a character has to appear in at least 3 games to be mentioned. What I count as a recurring character is if the character model appears more than once. I can't just go by name because Rauru the Sage from Ocarina of Time is not the same as Rauru the Zonai from Tears of the Kingdom, for example, so I can't reasonably count them as the same character even if they share names. That said, if they have a different model but have the same name and serve the exact same function, I'll be counting them as the same character. Lastly, if a character is just referenced somewhere without being an NPC you can interact with, I'm still counting it as an appearance, but it has to be unmistakably the same character. With that said, let's get started. Let's go over the folks that have appeared in 3 games first. I did say I wasn't gonna mention Ganon, but there is one antagonist who's the main villain of 3 games in his place, and that is, of course, Vaati, the Minish Sorcerer. He is the main villain of the Four Swords trilogy, those being Four Swords, where he first appeared, Four Swords Adventures, and the Minish Cap, where we also get his origin story. That makes him the second most recurring antagonist in the series. There's also another Zelda antagonist who appeared in 3 games, but is only the main villain in one of them. That character is Skull Kid, who is the main villain of Majora's Mask, but has appearances in Ocarina of Time as a prankster who hates adults, and as a sort of mini-boss in Twilight Princess, and a very annoying one at that. Let's now talk about one of the most iconic side characters in the series, Anju. Her most well-known appearance is definitely her Majora's Mask one, where she's featured in a lot of people's favorite side quest in the series alongside Kafei. People also know her well from Ocarina of Time, where you had to gather her 7 Kukos all over Kakariko Village to get a bottle. She's apparently allergic to them and can't catch them herself, which is ridiculous but also so real. I swear we all know that one person who says they're allergic to cats yet still has one. Why would you do that to yourself? Anyway, back in Ocarina of Time, she didn't have a name, she was just the Kuko Lady, but now everyone refers to her as Anju, which speaks to how iconic her role in Majora's Mask is. Beyond those 2 games, she did appear one more time in the Minish Cap, where she offers you a challenge to, get this, gather as many Kukos as you can, but under a time limit this time, in order to get a piece of heart. This time though, she is officially named Anju and not just the Kuko Lady. She has not been in any other game since. The most famous Majora's Mask original character, however, is not Enju. That honor goes to this guy, Tingle. He's not the one I'm going to be talking about here, as he appears in far more than just 3 games, but you see, he has brothers, including an adopted one, hilariously enough. They all appear in 3 games. Most of you guys already know they appear in the Minish Cap and the Wind Waker, but they also very briefly appear in Four Swords Adventures for the Tingle Tower mode, which is something I'm sure over 90% of people watching this video have never heard of. It's a minigame you unlock while playing through the main quest in multiplayer, and Tingle's brothers drop the tower on the map as well as transport the players to its different levels. It's very minor, but hey, they're clearly there, so it counts. Another pretty famous, or should I say infamous, character from the 64 games is Gepora Gebora, the annoying ass owl who keeps telling you stuff nobody gives a shit about and has anti-mashing strategies to make sure he wastes as much of your time as possible. Like I mentioned, he's in both 64 games, and is a lot more reasonable in Majora's Mask at least, and shows up here and there in Four Swords Adventures, usually at the beginning of levels to introduce them. Probably, I didn't actually read anything he says. He was also referenced as the headmaster of the Knight Academy in Skyward Sword, but that's clearly just a reference, so I'm not counting it. They did make sure to try to make him look like an owl as much as possible, but you didn't fool me, Nintendo. I saw right through the disguise. Speaking of Skyward Sword, this next character is kind of a stretch. The goddess Hylia has been in 3 games. Well, she hasn't really been seen, but we do see big statues of her in 3 games, being Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. Does that count? Might as well. Going back to Majora's Mask now, remember this guy, the Happy Mask Salesman? He is pretty hard to forget if you've played that game. Yeah, he shows up in a third one other than Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and I bet that even if you played it, you might not even have realized that it was him. I swear I'm not making this up, it's this guy from Oracle of Ages, whose only role in the whole game is to be hungry. If you give him food, he gives you a doggy mask, which I assume is how you're supposed to know he's the mask salesman. Speaking of, the woman who you give the mask to in that game's trading quest is also a recurring character in the series, who has appeared in 2 other games. Her name is Mamamoo Yan, and she is Richard's owner in Ocarina of Time and the dog race lady in Majora's Mask. Again, I swear I'm not making this up, this is 100% real. Another fairly minor character that has appeared in 1 game outside the 2 N64 ones is Guru Guru. Side note, have you ever had that one song that everybody seems to love except you? Yeah, for me that honor, or dishonor, goes to the Song of Storms. I don't know why, I just don't like it. Anyway, Guru Guru's one other appearance is in Oracle of Seasons, again as part of the game's trading quest. Compared to the previous 2, this one is pretty clear that it's meant to be the same guy. That song is associated with him forever. One character that I hesitated if I wanted to include is the Toilet Hand, referred simply as question mark in 2 of the games, being Majora's Mask and Oracle of Ages. There's also another Toilet Hand that appears in Skyward Sword, but it's known as Feeny in that game, and more importantly, doesn't look like the same character model. Feeny looks more like a ghost in the shape of a hand, and the other one looks more like some guy is stuck in the pothole and is sticking his hand out. I'm still gonna count it, as they serve basically the same purpose in all of their games, which is to be given paper to, even if the models are different. We've talked about the Oracle games a few times now, and their titular characters, the 3 Oracles, have also appeared in 3 games. All 3 appear in both Oracle games, if you do the linked story in the case of Din and Neru, and Furore is just chilling inside the Maku tree in both games. The other game in which they're found is the Minish Cap, where their only role is to obtain a house. However, there are only 2 houses that Gorman can build, which is someone we'll get to soon enough, and therefore one of the oracles will remain homeless. I don't know if it was meant as a joke since the Oracle games were supposed to be 3 games originally, but it's something I've always found pretty funny in a way. Another Capcom exclusive recurring character is Stockwell, who's just a basic shop owner in all 3 of the games. That's it, that's all he does. Next up we have the greatest writer in all of Hyrule, Mr. Wright. He first appeared in Link's Awakening as a pretty desperate guy who sends letters to people, presumably cute women out there, yet never gets an answer. That's gotta be rough, dude. He eventually gets one, and is officially the only video game character, that I know of at least, to be catfished. Nintendo really wanted to do this guy dirty for some reason. He later appeared in both Oracle of Seasons and the Minish Cap as Dr. Left. Ha, get it? Right? Left? Though they messed up the joke. If you look at Mr. Wright's artwork, we can see that he's left-handed, but if we look at Dr. Left's sprite in the Minish Cap, we see that he's right-handed. Come on man, how you mess that one up? Maybe that's the real joke and Nintendo are just layers deeper into it than I am. Also, look at that model from the Link's Awakening remake. Dude, how do you get away with having a character with this mustache in 2019? That's suspicious to say the least, though his original artwork wasn't much better to be fair. Anyway, he serves a very similar role in all 3 of those games, just being part of a trading quest of some sort. Last but not least for the characters who appear in 3 games, this is Tetra. And Tetra has friends, a lot of them actually, and 2 of them appear in 3 games, being Mako and Zuko. The first 2 games you can probably guess correctly, being the Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass. The last one, however, is not Spirit Tracks. In fact, most of you watching this have never seen them in that game. That's because they have only appeared during the Navy Trackers minigame from the Japanese version of Four Swords Adventures, where you must search for members of Tetra's gang and get stamps from them. This of course means that all of the pirates are present in the game. You may be asking yourself now, okay, Mako and Zuko appear in 3 games, but what about the other members of the squad? Surely they also appear in 3 games minimum, right? Well, no. Turns out Nudge and Senza don't appear at all in Phantom Hourglass. They're not in any cutscene in that game. I promise you it's true. Go load up the game right now just to watch the intro and see for yourself. Hey guys, Editing Simon here. I just realized while editing this video that Salvatore also appears in this mode of Four Swords Adventures in the Japanese version. So Salvatore is also a character that appears in 3 games. Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Four Swords Adventures. So yeah, I guess I should just mention this. Alright, back to the video. This leads me into the next set of characters, being the ones seen in 4 games, and the rest of the pirate gang are the first ones in line, being Nico and Gonzo. As established earlier, these 2 have been in the Wind Waker, Four Swords Adventures, and Phantom Hourglass, but they're also both in Spirit Tracks. Nico is officially the same character from the previous game, so there's no debate to have here. But technically, Gonzo's not really in the game, it's Alfonso instead who is his descendant. But they're pretty much the same character model with different clothes. They're closer alike than the 2 toilet hands I mentioned earlier, so I'm gonna count that. Another character that has had a change of name from one game to another is Maple, the Witch Apprentice. She has appeared in 3 games, being both Oracle games where she's an overworld encounter, and A Link to the Past where she has had a smaller role selling potions at Syrup's shop. In the GBA version, she looks a lot more like how you'd expect. Her last appearance is in A Link Between Worlds, under the name Irene instead of Maple. Technically, it's not the same character, but they're both really young witches flying on a broomstick. They're pretty much the same character. Outside of Tetra's Pirates, another group of characters we see 4 times are Din, Furore, and Neru. Not the oracles, but the goddesses. This one is very much a stretch, but they do appear in some way in 4 games. The first one, of course, is Ocarina of Time, where they're shown in many of the game's cutscenes. They're also briefly shown in the very famous Interlopers cutscene from Twilight Princess. I'm sure at least one person watching this has had nightmares from it at least once. The last 2 is where it gets, let's say, debatable. In the Wind Waker, there are 3 statues to which you present the pearls you get from the first half of the game. After placing all 3 of them, the statues explode and turn into what definitely looks like the 3 goddesses. Is it really them? I don't know, but it sure does look like them. Like I said, it's a stretch, but I think it's fair to count it. Their last appearance in a game is actually their first one ever. It was in A Link to the Past, but not in the actual game though. They were shown in the manual. The creation of Hyrule is described in here, but back then the goddesses had no official name. That said, they clearly are meant to be Dinforor and Neru, so it counts. Alright, we got a couple of characters that are not that interesting to talk about, so let's just rapid fire through them. Muthos Carpenters, seen in Kakariko Village from Ocarina of Time, also appear in Majora's Mask, but also in Oracle of Ages as bridge builders, and in the Minish Cap as annoying assholes whose only role is to block you from returning to Castle Town until you beat the first dungeon. We also have Bigoron, or Big G as I like to call him, originally from OT, giving you the strongest sword, who appears in Majora's Mask as a blizzard spammer. This guy definitely has more than 8 PP for that move. He's also in Oracle of Seasons as part of the trading quest, and in the Minish Cap, serving as post-game content to get the Mirror Shield. The Goron Chief in Phantom Hourglass is also named Bigoron, but let's keep it real, it's not even close to the same character, so he doesn't count. Speaking of big, we also have the Great Deku Tree, also first appearing in Ocarina of Time, and then in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom as the Guardian of the Master Sword of sorts. And also in the Wind Waker, where he had debatably his most important role for both the story and side content. On the evil side of things, we have Koume and Kotake, aka Twin Rova, seen in Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and both Oracle games. If you want to be more specific, we see the fused Twin Rova form in 3 of those games, OT and both Oracle games, and only in those 2 if you do the linked story and get the real ending. One last thing with these 2, they're both kinda, but not really present in one of the Tears of the Kingdom memories, the one where Ganondorf pledges allegiance to Rauru. You can read both their names in Hylian on their clothing as well. That said, we don't really have an in-game confirmation that it's really them, so I'll just mention them and leave it up to you guys if you think it should count. And that was the last one. Time to move on to the characters who appeared in 5 games, which is surprisingly not that many. One of them I already briefly mentioned earlier, which is Syrup the Witch. She shows up for the first time in A Link to the Past, then again in Link's Awakening, and also in all 3 Capcom games, where she does the same thing in all of them, just being a witch making potions or magic powder by using mushrooms. Essentially what Koume and Kotake do in Majora's Mask. This next character was first introduced in Ocarina of Time, but found his true role 1 game later. I'm of course talking about the Postman. He first appeared simply as the Running Man in Ocarina of Time, but then took his mantle as the Postman starting in Majora's Mask, and then followed it up in Oracle of Ages, the Minish Cap, and of course, in Twilight Princess as his objectively greatest appearance. I know there are other postmen in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, which, by the way, have the worst postal system I've ever seen in anything ever. What's the point of having the postman read your letters out loud to you? That makes no sense. What's the point of having post boxes in the first place? They don't do that anymore in Spirit Tracks, they went back to giving out letters, but again, what's the point of having mailboxes at all if the postman still hands the letters to you directly anyway? The changes were probably made due to the players being annoyed at the Twilight Princess postman always interrupting gameplay, but you can't deny that in-game, these changes make absolutely no sense whatsoever. Anyway, this postman is clearly not the same character as the one from previous games, so I'm not counting him as part of the mail-delivering dynasty. I should also mention that Koboli, the mail sorter on Dragon Roost Island in The Wind Waker, resembles the Majora's Mask postman immensely, but this one I also just see as a reference rather than a full-on appearance. Next up, I said I was gonna get to him eventually. Well, here he is, Gorman. He appears of course in the Minish Cap as a house seller like I said earlier, and also in Majora's Mask along with his brothers. That said, the first time we ever see Gorman was under another name. He was formerly known as Ingo in OT, and was Talon's ranch working buddy. Well, buddy might not be the right word here. Yeah, he hates Talon for being a lazy sack of shit, which he is. Let's be real here, he is. Anyway, he appears one more time in Oracle of Seasons as, you guessed it, part of the trading quest where he is waiting on Big G's vase. Again, I swear I'm not making this up. That's really him, you can look it up. His final appearance is in A Link Between Worlds as the Laurel Milk Bar owner. He doesn't have a name, but we can clearly guess that it's him, as his Hyrule counterpart, who also doesn't have a name, is clearly Talon. Our last character on this list is going to be Malon, our favorite ranch girl. She is seen as herself in 4 games, those being Ocarina of Time where she first appeared, in Oracle of Seasons where she is again part of the training quest, and I'm again not making this up, in Four Swords Adventures in the Near the Fields level, which I think is one of the most fun in the game, and finally in the Minish Cap. She's also seen under a different name in one more game. I'm of course talking about Romani from Majora's Mask, and also Cremia for that matter. But note that the adult model of Malon only appears in the 2 N64 games. Her father Talon appears in one more game than her, which means it's time to move on to the characters that appear in, well, 6 games. Outside of Ocarina of Time, he's also seen in Majora's Mask as none other than the milk bar owner in East Clocktown, where he can be seen selling overpriced, presumably alcoholic dairy drinks to minors. You know, Talon might be a lazy and unreliable slacker to his daughter and coworker, but even he wouldn't sink this slow. Or maybe he would, I don't really know. Just as mentioned previously, his devotion as a milk bar owner has also extended to A Link Between Worlds. He also appears in the Minish Cap as himself, and in Oracle of Seasons, just like in Go and Malon, as part of the trading quest. I promise this is the last one. His final appearance is in Four Swords Adventures, in the same level as Malon, as you might have guessed. That said, there's one more game we need to talk about with these two characters, which is Link's Awakening, as there's a very legit argument to be made to count Marin and Terran as the same model as Malon and Talon. What, are you saying that Marin and Terran are references to Malon and Talon? No, I'm saying it's the opposite. Link's Awakening was made before Ocarina of Time, remember? Their names are also suspiciously similar, especially if you try to say them in Japanese, which I won't do because I'm not getting cancelled today. You know, for how much games after Ocarina of Time love to reference that game, OOT itself sure has its fair share of references to its predecessors. I'm also pretty sure that Ingo is supposed to be based on the henhouse keeper of that game. The reason as to why I'm not counting them is because I see it the same as the Kapora Gabor reference in Skyward Sword. They're just a simple reference and not the same character, though that reference ended up becoming the standard after Ocarina of Time, funnily enough. The models are also really difficult to determine if they're the same, especially when it comes to Marin. I can give you a reason why for each pixel forming these models, which to be fair is not that many, and that's the problem. With Terran, it's a bit more debatable, but when comparing official artworks from Nintendo, it becomes clear that they aren't really that similar. Maple and Irene, for example, are a lot closer alike than these two. We are at our last character for this part of the video. Can you guess who it is? This is again someone that first appeared in Ocarina of Time. We're getting close to the end here, so only the heavy hitters are left. Knowing that, you can probably deduce who it is. Of course, it's Dampé the Gravekeeper. Beyond Ocarina of Time, where he holds the worst piece of heart in the game, he's also seen in Majora's Mask, where he holds the worst bottle in the game, in Four Swords Adventures during one of the worst levels of the game, in the Minish Cap during one of the worst parts of the game, in A Link Between Worlds as one of the worst characters in the game, and finally in the 2019 remake of Link's Awakening, where he hosts the most useless new feature of the game. I may or may not despise this guy. I feel like he just makes the game worse just by his presence, like just him existing just makes everything worse, I don't know. Anyway, moving on to the fourth most recurring character in the series. Your hint this time is that he first appeared in The Wind Waker. It's too easy, you already figured out it's Beetle. Yes, our favorite merchant has appeared 7 times. First in The Wind Waker, as already stated, then in the Minish Cap, then later in both DS games, and finally in the 3 latest 3D games, being Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. He has had the exact same role in all of these games, being a merchant selling you goodies. He usually has some legit stuff for sale too, so he's worth visiting from time to time. We're in the top 3 now. This next character is someone I've already mentioned once in this video, and is the most popular character out of the remaining ones. Of course, it's our fairy friend Tingle, who was seen in 8 games. He's basically like Crocker from Fairly OddParents, where he's gone mad at 35 years old looking for fairies, or I guess believing he himself is a fairy. I'm not sure which one is worse, honestly. He was first seen in Majora's Mask as the map guy, but has appeared in Oracle of Ages and in The Wind Waker as the same role. Even Ricky says he can't stand Tingle, Jesus Christ. He has then shown up as the Force Gem stealing asshole in Four Swords Adventures, and then just as an excuse for fusing Kinstones in the Minish Cap along with his brothers. He was then only referenced in later games without officially appearing in them. He was on a wanted poster inside the milk bar in Phantom Hourglass, and you can find a couple of statues of him in Spirit Tracks. There's also a picture of him in Ferris's home for some reason in that game, and I don't really think I want to know why. Lastly, you can find a Tingle-shaped doll in Zelda's room in the Knight Academy in Skyward Sword. That raises about 1 trillion questions in terms of lore and continuity, but let's not think about it too much, I guess. The next character, the second most recurring one, is one you probably forgot about, even though she's as iconic as it gets in the series. I said someone, but she's not actually a person. It's our favorite mount Epona, who has appeared in 9 games. She was first introduced in Ocarina of Time, and has followed that same Link's adventures in Majora's Mask. She also briefly appears in the intro cutscenes of both of the Oracle games, is used as a temporary power-up in the same Four Swords Adventures level as we see Malon and Talon, is right alongside the aforementioned Malon in Hyrule Town in the Minish Cap, is with Link again in Twilight Princess as her most important appearance, and is sadly left as Amiibo Lock content in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I really wish we could find her in the wild like we can with Zelda's or Ganon's horse. What sucks the most about specifically Breath of the Wild is that you cannot change her gear, meaning you can't give her the ancient saddle to teleport her wherever you are. That is so sad. Listen, I like you a lot, my boy, I think you look great, but I'd rather use Epona instead. Sorry dude, she's the real goat here. And finally, appearing in a whopping grand total of not 9, not 10, but 11 games, the #1 most recurring character in Zelda history is... Impa. You can call this a stretch, as her character models and her official art has varied a lot throughout the games, but every time there was a character named Impa in a Zelda game, she has always been a servant of the royal family and primarily Princess Zelda's personal attendant. She has had this role in Zelda 1 and 2, as depicted in those games as manual, Ocarina of Time, Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, Skyward Sword, A Link Between Worlds, Breath of the Wild, and finally Tears of the Kingdom. She was not directly featured in the Wind Waker, but she has appeared on one of the games' mural inside the Master Sword Chamber, which is 100% Impa from Ocarina of Time. And finally, we saw her under the name Impaz in Twilight Princess, which is clearly meant to be Impa, let's be real here, where she was instructed by the royal family to stay in the hidden village until the Messenger of the Skies appears before her. That's pretty terrible of the royal family to force her to stay in this abandoned village for the rest of her life. At least she has a bunch of cats to keep her company there. Also, look at Impaz's model. Now look at Impa's model from Breath of the Wild. Yeah, they're practically the same. And there you have it, the most recurring characters in Zelda history. I did leave some of them out, primarily stuff like Dark Link and Goma, who I felt were more bosses than characters, so I chose not to include them in here. I also didn't mention the various Kings of Hyrule, as each one is technically a different person, even if they all look somewhat similar. The same logic applies to King Zora. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you like seeing all these characters come back over and over? Do you think it's too much? Should we move on from them, or should they stay? Do you like it when games have references to older entries like this? Give me your thoughts in the comments. I will read it. And thanks everyone for watching.